It was a hot afternoon, the kind where the late sun slanted through the rows of betel nut trees at the gate. Lan, a young woman barely in her 20s, was helping her mother tidy up the yard when she suddenly heard the voice of old Mr. Bay calling from across the lane. Mr. Bay was well into his 70s, living alone in a weathered wooden house at the end of the hamlet. Lan had known him since childhood, often stopping by to lend a hand with small chores. To him, she was like a granddaughter. Lan hurried over and found him fumbling with a torn tarp inside his storage shed. Curious, she stepped closer, and just as the tarp slipped down, a cloud of dust exploded into the air, filling her nose with a musty, choking smell that made her sneeze. Beneath the thick blanket of dust emerged the outline of a motorbike, an old KPR Boss City, once the dream machine of so many young men in the 1990s. "Oh my gosh, is this yours?" Lan's eyes widened. Mr. Bay sighed, his trembling hand brushing over the peeling paint. "Yes. This was my companion for decades. But the engine broke down, I had no money to fix it, so I abandoned it here. Counting the years, it hasn't roared to life in 24 years. Lan stepped closer, touching the rusted handlebar. The seat cover had torn apart, exposing springs beneath. The fuel tank was dented and covered with patches of rust. Tires sagged flat, rubber crumbling. The frame was cloaked in spider webs. The entire machine looked more like a pile of scrap metal than a vehicle that had once run proudly down the roads. Yet to Lan, it had a strange allure. She turned to the old man, her eyes shining. "Grandpa Bay, what if I try to restore it? I want to see if I can bring it back to life. I've always loved tinkering with bikes." The old man looked startled, then slowly smiled. "You think you can do it? It's badly ruined, engine seized, tank rusted out, wires chewed by rats. But if you truly have the determination, I won't stop you. My only wish is to hear it roar once more before I leave this world." Those words struck deep into Lan's heart, filling her with fierce determination. She nodded firmly. "I'll do it, Grandpa. I promise." The very next day, she arrived with a backpack full of tools, wrenches, spanners, sockets, a rubber mallet, kerosene, wire brushes, and a can of rust remover. She spread out a clean tarp in the yard, rolled the bike onto it. Mr. Bay sat on an old wooden chair nearby, his clouded eyes following her every move. Lan began with basic cleaning. Using a large brush, she scrubbed away the caked-on dirt, clumps of dried mud tumbled down with each stroke. Clouds of dust rose, making her cough, but as the layers disappeared, the machine's shape grew clearer. She soaked a rag with kerosene and wiped down every small corner, especially the rusted bolts. Then she sprayed anti-rust solution over the entire fastener system, letting it soak overnight. "You really planning to strip it all apart?" Mr. Bay asked. "Yes, I'll have to disassemble everything, Grandpa. Only then can I clean and check each part. I'll sort them out, replace what's broken, keep what's salvageable," Lan answered, still bent over, scrubbing a stubborn bolt. The following morning, she began dismantling piece by piece. First came the seat. She loosened the bolts with a socket wrench, struggling to turn them because they were frozen stiff. After much effort, the seat came off, and with it, a whole nest of rats spilled out. The dried carcass of one dropped to the ground, making her gag. Under the seat has become a rat nest, Grandpa," she exclaimed, half laughing, half grimacing. Mr. Bay chuckled and shook his head. Too many years gone by. Who would have thought they'd make a home there? Next was the fuel tank. The moment she opened the cap, a stench of stale gasoline hit her, acrid and foul. Shining a flashlight inside, she saw thick layers of yellow varnish deposits and rust eating through the walls. This one might need chemical treatment, or maybe a complete replacement. The plastic fairings were brittle, cracked in places. Lan carefully removed each panel, marking them with a permanent marker before setting them aside. Everything must be labeled, or I'll get lost when reassembling. The toughest task was pulling out the engine block. Heavy and stuck to the frame, it refused to budge. Lan called in 2 of her friends from the village. Together, with wrenches and a few blows from the rubber mallet, they finally wrestled it free and placed the massive lump of metal on a wooden bench. As the engine came out, a shower of dust and cobwebs fell away, revealing the corroded skeleton of the frame, parts eaten right through with rust holes. Lan wiped her sweat, staring at the grimy engine. Now the real work begins. She decided to record everything, both to keep memories and to share with online mechanic communities. Setting up her phone, she began her first vlog. Hi everyone, today I'm starting a project to restore this KPR Boss City that's been abandoned for 24 years. Current condition: seized engine, rotten tank, rusted frame, electrical system dead. I'll strip everything, clean each part, and rebuild it. Not sure how far I'll get, but I'll give it my all. She panned the camera over the engine cases, blackened, with a broken spark plug jammed in. Wiring chewed to tatters. Tires cracked wide open. Each shot captured the decay, but also a sense of history. That afternoon, Lan began opening the engine cases. She worked the bolts carefully, but many were so rusted they wouldn't budge. She sprayed more penetrant, tapped them with the rubber mallet, until they grudgingly loosened. Lifting off the side cover, she gagged at the sight. The inside was caked with thick sludge, black as tar, reeking of burnt oil. No problem, step by step. I'll clean it all, she muttered to herself. She extracted the piston, examining its surface. Deep scratches scarred the metal, the rings broken and gapped. This, clearly, was the death of the engine years ago. This needs replacement. But I'll keep the old piston as a memento, it's the heart of the bike. She moved on to the camshaft and valves. Everything was carbon-fouled, springs weakened. She dropped the pieces into a basin of kerosene, leaving them to soak overnight. While they soaked, she turned to the frame. With the wire brush, she scrubbed furiously, knocking away layers of rust. Shiny metal peeked through here and there, but several spots had holes eaten clear through. She marked them with chalk, places that would need welding patches later. From his chair, Mr. Bay watched, eyes glistening with memories. Back in the day, this bike took me everywhere. To the fields, the market, even faraway cities. I once rode all day without tiring. It was my best friend, Lan. Lan paused, smiling at him. Then I'll bring it back so you can hear it roar again, Grandpa. Don't worry. Night fell, but Lan hadn't stopped. Under the dim yellow lamp, she meticulously wiped each bolt and piece of metal. Her hands were stained with grease, but her eyes still sparkled. For her, this wasn't just a repair job, it was a journey, a bridge between past and present, and a gift for the old man who had guarded its memory all these years. That night ended with Lan sitting quietly beside the disassembled engine, mind racing with plans. Tomorrow she would wash each piece, start searching for replacement parts, and prepare for the true phase of restoration. Outside, cicadas chirped in chorus, the night breeze cool against her sweaty face. Fueling her resolve that afternoon, Lan turned her attention fully to the frame. The wire brush had revealed multiple weak spots. She borrowed a small welding kit from a local mechanic, carried it home with nervous excitement. She had practiced welding before on scrap metal, but never on something that mattered. She strapped on a visor, gloves, and fired up the torch. The bright arc hissed to life, spitting sparks as she melted small steel patches onto the rust-eaten holes. Each weld crackled like fireworks. Her hands trembled at first, beads of sweat rolling down her forehead, but soon she steadied. Slowly, the skeleton of the bike regained solidity. Mr. Bay shuffled closer, leaning on his cane. You're really giving it a new backbone, child. Lan lifted her visor, face smudged with soot. It deserves to stand tall again, Grandpa. When the last weld cooled, she ground down the beads with a handheld grinder, smoothing the surface. The frame looked scarred but strong, ready for another life. She wiped it down with thinner, then brushed on a coat of anti-rust primer. The dull grey sheen spread across the metal like a protective skin. Lan stepped back, inhaling deeply. The transformation was small but undeniable. For the first time, the Boss City no longer looked like a carcass, it looked like a machine waiting to return. The engine heartbeat. With the frame safe, Lan dove back into the engine. She split the crankcase carefully, exposing the crankshaft and bearings. Years of immobility had left the bearings seized, balls pitted and dry. She prodded them with a screwdriver, no spin at all. "These will have to go," she murmured. Replacing bearings was tricky, but she wanted to try. Using a heat gun, she warmed the crankcase halves until the aluminum expanded slightly. With a few careful taps, the old bearings popped out. She cleaned the housings, proud of the progress. "Now I just need the right replacements," she sighed, noting the code stamped on the sides. She'd scour the market for them later. She polished the crankshaft journals with fine sandpaper, removing surface rust. The connecting rod, though, worried her. It had noticeable play. Another item for the replace list. The pile grew again, but Lan refused to let despair in. She had expected this. 24 years of abandonment wouldn't be solved overnight. By evening, she had cleaned nearly every salvageable part. The workbench sparkled with oiled steel, neatly organized trays, labeled with masking tape. The sight filled her with pride. Painting the skeleton. 2 days later, after sourcing supplies from a nearby town, Lan began the painting process. She had chosen a deep midnight blue for the frame, accented with silver highlights, close to the bike's original shade but refreshed for modern taste. She strung the bare frame from a makeshift stand under a tree, wrapped newspapers around areas she didn't want painted, and shook the spray can vigorously. The hiss of paint filled the air as she laid down the first coat. Thin, even passes, side to side, building up layers patiently. The grey primer slowly vanished beneath shimmering blue. Each stroke transformed rust into life, scars into style. Sunlight glinted on the wet paint, and Lan felt a thrill shoot through her chest. Mr. Bay, watching, whispered softly, almost to himself, "Just like when I first brought it home." Lan smiled but didn't pause. She applied 3 coats in total, then sealed it with clear lacquer for protection. When the final coat dried, the frame gleamed like new, as if time itself had been peeled away. Plastics and aesthetics. Next came the plastic fairings. Many were cracked or brittle. Lan heated a soldering iron, carefully melting the cracks back together from behind, reinforcing them with thin metal mesh. She sanded the surfaces smooth, filling gaps with putty, then sprayed them with fresh paint matching the frame. Hours stretched into nights. Her small workspace turned into a miniature workshop, tools scattered, paint cans empty, rags soaked in oil. But slowly, the Boss City's identity re-emerged. She laid the restored fairings on the grass, each piece gleaming. The front fender, once yellowed and cracked, now shone a glossy blue. The side panels bore crisp silver stripes. Lan ran her hand across them, whispering, "You're coming back together." Electrical nightmares. One evening, Lan tackled the electrical system. The old wiring harness was shredded, insulation crumbling like dry leaves. Rats had chewed entire sections. She stared at the mess, overwhelmed. "Rebuilding this will take forever," she muttered. But she refused to cut corners. She drew a diagram from memory and from old manuals she found online, then began soldering fresh wires. Red for ignition, black for ground, yellow for lights, green for signals. She wrapped each joint with heat-shrink tubing, methodical and precise. Hours passed. Her fingers ached, but by midnight, a new harness lay coiled neatly like a snake ready to strike. The reunion of parts. As days blurred into weeks, the project advanced. The frame, painted and strong, stood ready. The engine components, cleaned and partly rebuilt, awaited the new piston and bearings she'd ordered. The fairings, glossy and proud, rested on a shelf. The wiring harness, fresh and neat, lay bundled. Lan began reassembly slowly. She mounted the swing arm, the freshly painted forks, then slid in the wheels after fitting new tires. She greased the bearings, tightened the axles. For the first time, the Boss City stood again on its own 2 wheels, upright and proud. Lan circled it, heart racing. The skeleton of a bike had become a bike once more. Conversations in twilight. Every evening, Mr. Bay would shuffle out to watch. One twilight, as cicadas hummed, he said quietly, "You remind me of myself when I first got it." I used to stay up all night polishing it, tuning the carburetor just for the joy of it. Back then, this machine was more than transport, it was freedom. It carried me to see the sea for the first time, to take my wife to the hospital when she gave birth. It carried me to funerals, weddings, markets, everything. Lan listened silently, hands still tightening a bolt. When he paused, she whispered, "Then I'll make sure it carries you one more time, Grandpa. That's my promise." The old man's eyes glistened in the dim light, and he nodded slowly. By the end of the second phase, the KPR Boss City no longer looked abandoned. It wasn't finished, not yet, the engine still needed major surgery, and the electrical system had yet to be tested. But its body stood proud again, frame gleaming, fairings polished, wheels rolling. Lan wiped her greasy hands on a rag, looking at the almost whole bike. The hardest part was still ahead, to breathe life back into the silent engine. But she was ready. In her heart, she could already hear the roar echoing through the village. The days turned into weeks, and Lan's small workspace was now almost unrecognizable. Tools lay in careful order on shelves, the scent of paint and kerosene still lingered, and in the center, the KPR Boss City stood tall, frame repainted, fairings restored, wheels aligned. It looked ready, but the heart of the machine still lay silent on the workbench. Lan wiped sweat from her brow as she stared at the crankshaft, piston, and valves laid neatly before her. This was the final stage, rebuilding the engine. She had been waiting for the new piston, rings, and bearings she'd ordered, and when the package finally arrived wrapped in brown paper, she held it like treasure. "Today," she whispered, tearing it open. Inside gleamed the fresh parts, cold and clean, untouched by time. The engine rebuild. Lan began with the bearings. She heated the crankcase again, gently pressing the new bearings into place until they seated with satisfying clicks. The crankshaft followed, sliding smoothly into its new home. She spun it carefully, smooth, no grinding. A grin spread across her face. Next came the piston. She oiled the cylinder walls, slipped the piston rings carefully into their grooves, compressing them with a homemade tool, and slid the piston into the freshly honed cylinder. It moved smoothly, snug but free. She installed the connecting rod, torquing the bolts to specification. Then came the cylinder head. She had lapped the valves the previous night, grinding them until they sealed perfectly. Now she reassembled them with new springs and retainers, fitting the camshaft carefully. Hours passed unnoticed. Her hands moved with a mixture of caution and confidence, her mind completely absorbed. By sunset, the engine was whole again, gleaming silver, with black cooling fins catching the last light of day. Lan leaned back, wiping her face with her sleeve. She whispered to the machine, "You have your heart again. Now let's see if you'll breathe." The carburetor challenge. The carburetor was another story. It was clogged with hardened residue, the float stuck, jets blocked. Lan dismantled it piece by piece, soaking everything in cleaner, poking through the jets with fine copper wire. When she reassembled it, she noticed the throttle slide was still sticky. She sanded it gently, polished the bore, until it moved like silk. Finally, she mounted it to the intake manifold, connecting fuel lines she had replaced with new rubber hoses. Electrical awakening. Night fell, but Lan wasn't ready to stop. She unrolled the wiring harness she'd built in part 2 and began threading it through the frame. Each connector snapped into place, ignition coil, regulator, lights. She double-checked polarity, grounding, fuses. "Moment of truth," she murmured. She connected a freshly charged battery. Sparks crackled faintly as current surged through the wires. The neutral indicator on the dash flickered green. Lan's heart skipped. After 24 silent years, the Boss City showed its first sign of life. She laughed aloud, the sound echoing in the night. "You're waking up." First kick. The next morning, villagers gathered around, curiosity piqued. Mr. Bay sat nearby, cane in hand, his eyes never leaving the bike. Lan filled the tank with fresh fuel, opened the petcock, and let gasoline flow into the carburetor. She checked oil levels, tightened bolts, adjusted timing. Everything was ready. She swung the Kickstarter down gently to prime, then gave it a full strong kick. The engine coughed, a dry, hollow sound, but a sound nonetheless. Another kick. A sputter. Smoke puffed from the exhaust. Gasps rose from the crowd. Lan's face shone with sweat, but she didn't stop. She adjusted the choke, twisted the throttle slightly, and kicked again. Broom, broom, the machine stuttered, coughed, and then roared. The exhaust exploded with life, rattling the yard. A plume of smoke filled the air, birds scattered from the trees, and children shouted with joy. Lan's heart raced, tears filling her eyes. She twisted the throttle gently, and the sound deepened, steady and powerful. The Boss City was alive. Emotions unleashed. Mr. Bay's cane trembled in his grip. His lips quivered as he whispered, "I can't believe it. After all these years." Lan shut off the engine, letting the silence settle. She turned to him, smiling. "She's back, Grandpa. Just like you remembered." The old man stood with difficulty, eyes wet. "I thought I'd never hear that sound again. It's the sound of my youth, of roads I thought were lost forever." Lan knelt beside him. "Then let's make a new memory. Let's ride." The first ride. With the villagers watching, Lan helped Mr. Bay onto the passenger seat. She swung onto the front, steadying the bike beneath them. His hands clutched her shoulders, trembling not from weakness but from overwhelming emotion. She kicked the starter again. The engine fired instantly this time, eager, alive. She slipped it into first gear, released the clutch, and the bike rolled forward. The wind brushed against their faces as they moved down the village road. Children ran alongside, cheering, dogs barked, neighbors waved. For Mr. Bay, each turn of the wheels carried him back decades. He closed his eyes, feeling the vibration through his bones, the steady thrum between his legs. It was as if he was young again, his wife behind him, the open road ahead. "Lan," he shouted over the engine noise, tears streaking his face, "thank you." Lan laughed through her own tears. "We did it together, Grandpa." They circled the village, the Boss City roaring proudly. The sound echoed against the houses, carrying not just noise but memory, heritage, and hope. The celebration. When they returned, the villagers erupted in applause. Some clapped, others whistled, children jumped. The old men wiped their eyes, remembering their own rides from years gone by. Lan killed the engine and helped Mr. Bay down. He stood straight despite his cane, placing his hand lovingly on the tank. "She's not just a machine," he said softly. "She's family." The villagers nodded in agreement. They knew they had witnessed more than a restoration. They had witnessed resurrection. A promise kept. That night, as the village quieted, Lan sat alone by the bike. The moonlight glowed on its polished surfaces, the paint shimmering blue. She ran her fingers along the tank, whispering, "You're more than steel. You're memory, promise, and love. I'll keep you alive, always." Inside the house, Mr. Bay slept soundly, a smile on his face for the first time in years. Lan closed her eyes, listening to the cooling tick of the engine. The project was over, but the journey had just begun. The Boss City was no longer abandoned. It had found a new rider, a new purpose, and a new future. Lan stood beside the gleaming KPR Boss City, the engine still warm after its first true ride in decades. The villagers had gone home, Mr. Bay was resting peacefully inside, and the night air was calm. She turned toward the camera, wiping her hands on a rag, her smile bright with both exhaustion and pride. "Thank you for staying with me through this long journey," she said, her voice steady but emotional. This wasn't just about fixing a motorcycle. It was about restoring memories, honoring the past, and proving that with patience and love, even something forgotten for 24 years can live again. She rested her hand gently on the tank of the Boss City. "I hope this story inspired you, the same way it inspired me. If you enjoyed this journey, please don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next adventure. Every comment, every bit of support from you, gives me strength to keep creating and bringing old machines back to life." Lan glanced at the bike once more, then back at the camera, her eyes shining. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. See you in the next project. The screen slowly faded to black, with the words, "Subscribe for more restorations." Every machine has a story.